For 95 years, every American mob family has answered to the same structure. 5 families, 1 commission, 1 set of rules. The man who built it was 33 years old. He was a Sicilian immigrant who arrived in America with nothing. He grew up on the Lower East Side of New York. He met his best friend on the streets of that neighborhood when both were boys. That friend was a Jewish kid named Meyer Lansky. Together, they would build a criminal empire that outlasted Al Capone, outlasted Prohibition, and outlasted the system that put them in power. But to do it, Lucky Luciano had to do something no American gangster had done before. He had to organize chaos. He had to turn the old-world Sicilian bosses into a board of directors. He had to invent a system that would last after he was gone. And before he could do any of that, he had to orchestrate the murders of the 2 most powerful gangsters in America. One was his own boss. The other was the man who took over after the first one died. Both murders happened in 1931, 5 months apart. Both were planned by the same 33-year-old. The system he set in motion in those 5 months still runs the American Mafia today. 5 families, 1 commission, 1 set of rules. This is the story of how a Sicilian immigrant, Lucky Luciano, buried 2 bosses and built the American Mafia, and the 5 months it took him to do it. Salvatore Lucania was born in Sicily in November 1897. He came to New York's Lower East Side as a child, settling in a neighborhood of tenements, sweatshops, and immigrant gangs. By his early teens, he was running protection rackets in the schoolyards. By Luciano's own later telling, he met Meyer Lansky when both were boys on the Lower East Side, and Lansky was the kid who refused to pay protection. Twice. He got beaten worse each time and kept coming back. Lansky himself, in interviews decades later, denied the story ever happened. Whatever the truth was, the friendship was real. They would remain friends for the rest of Luciano's life. The Lower East Side in those years was a war zone of competing immigrant gangs. The Italians fought the Irish fought the Jews fought everyone. Salvatore, who was starting to be called Charlie by the Americans, joined the 5 Points gang. He met Frank Costello. He met the men who would matter, and many of them remembered him. Then, in 1920, the world changed. The Volstead Act made it illegal to manufacture, transport, or sell alcohol in America. Overnight, every working-class American who wanted a drink had become a criminal. And every criminal who could supply that drink became rich. Charlie was already running small-time bootlegging operations with Lansky. Within 2 years, they were running large ones. By 1925, he was the chief enforcer for Joe Masseria, a Sicilian-born boss who controlled the largest Italian-American gang in New York. Joe the Boss, they called him. He was old. He was loud. He spoke broken English. He distrusted Jews, Irish, and basically everyone who wasn't from his own corner of Sicily. He distrusted Luciano, too. But Luciano made him money, millions of dollars in bootleg liquor, and so the distrust stayed quiet. The Prohibition years made Charlie rich and untouchable. Until one night in October 1929,
when neither was enough. In October 1929, Luciano disappeared. For 36 hours, no one knew where he was. When he turned up, he was on a beach on Staten Island. His face had been cut from ear to mouth. He had been beaten so badly that one eye was permanently damaged. He had been left for dead.
The story he told changed, depending on who he told it to. Corrupt cops, Maranzano's men, his own boss, Masseria. The truth has never been confirmed. What is certain is that he survived. The men who walked away from his beaten body had made the worst mistake of their lives. When he got back to Manhattan, his friends gave him a new name. They called him Lucky. The man who had survived a hit that should have killed him would, within 18 months, orchestrate the most consequential mob assassinations in American history. The man who couldn't be killed would become the man who decided who lived and who died. To understand what he did in 1931,
you have to understand the war he was about to take over.
By 1928, the Italian-American mob in New York had split into two armies. On one side was Joe Masseria, Luciano's boss, the Sicilian-born traditionalist who ran the biggest gang in the city. On the other side was Salvatore Maranzano, a different kind of Sicilian, educated and refined, who had been sent to America specifically to take over American organized crime. Maranzano was different. By later accounts, he had studied for the priesthood as a young man. He read Julius Caesar in Latin. He believed that organized crime should be structured like the Roman army, with ranks, codes of honor, and a single supreme leader. That supreme leader, in his vision, was himself. Masseria stood in the way. So, in February 1930, Maranzano went to war. What followed was 14 months of violence that came to be known as the Castellammarese War, named for the Sicilian town of Castellamare del Golfo, where most of Maranzano's loyalists had been born. Bodies started showing up across the city. Restaurants were sprayed with gunfire. Apartments were bombed. Bosses were ambushed in barbershops. The death toll has been debated for decades. The bodies kept coming. Luciano watched all of this from inside Masseria's camp. He was Masseria's underboss. He was supposed to be loyal. He was not loyal. What he was patient. Throughout 1930, Luciano had been quietly meeting with Maranzano's lieutenants.
He had also been meeting with his own friends, Lansky, Costello, Vito Genovese, and with figures outside the war, including Tommy Lucchese and Joe Bonanno.
He was building something underneath the war, a network of younger men, mostly American-born, who were tired of taking orders from old-world Sicilians who didn't speak English. Men who saw bootlegging as a business, not a blood feud. Men who wanted to make money and who understood, in a way the older generation never had, that you couldn't make money in a war. By the spring of 1931, the war had ground to a stalemate. Masseria was losing men. Maranzano was losing patience. Luciano went to Maranzano with a proposal. If Maranzano would guarantee Luciano's safety and his position,
Luciano would deliver Masseria. Maranzano agreed. It was the deal that broke the Italian-American mob, and it was a deal that Maranzano would not live long enough to regret.
On April 15, 1931, Lucky Luciano invited his boss to lunch. The restaurant was Nuova Villa Tammaro in Coney Island. It was a Wednesday. The lunch went on for hours. Eyewitnesses later said they played cards. They drank wine. They talked about nothing. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, Luciano stood up from the table. He said he needed to use the bathroom. He walked to the back of the restaurant. He stayed there. 4 men entered the front of the restaurant. They walked to Masseria's table. They opened fire. When the police arrived, Masseria was slumped over the table, the ace of diamonds still in his hand. When officers asked Luciano what had happened, he claimed he had been in the bathroom the entire time. He hadn't seen anything. No one was ever charged with the murder. The 4 men were never publicly identified.
Some sources name Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, and Joe Adonis.
Others give different names. What is certain is that the men were Luciano's. The plan was Luciano's. The Castellammarese War ended the day Joe Masseria died. Salvatore Maranzano declared victory. And within weeks, he would make the same mistake Joe the boss made. He underestimated Lucky Luciano. Salvatore Maranzano summoned 500 mafia leaders to a banquet in the Bronx. He announced a new structure for American organized crime. He divided New York into 5 families. He named the heads of each family, and he named himself Capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. Lucky Luciano sat in that banquet hall, listening. He had just delivered Joe Masseria. He had been promised his safety and his position. Maranzano had given him both. But within weeks, Luciano realized something. Joe Bonanno later wrote that Maranzano had drawn up a list of every younger boss in America strong enough to threaten his new throne. Luciano was at the top of that list. So was Lansky. So was Frank Costello. Maranzano planned to have them killed. The man Luciano had just made the most powerful gangster in America was about to murder him. Luciano had 5 months to decide what to do about it. He decided in less than 5 weeks. To kill Salvatore Maranzano was not a small thing. He was the self-declared boss of all bosses. He had bodyguards. He had a fortified office in Manhattan. He had spies everywhere. He had, most importantly,
the loyalty of nearly every old-world Sicilian gangster in America. Luciano needed something Maranzano would not see coming. He needed a team Maranzano's spies would not recognize. He went to Meyer Lansky. Lansky had something Luciano did not. Lansky had a network of Jewish gunmen, men who were not part of any Italian-American family. None of Maranzano's people would recognize them by sight. Lansky put 4 men on the team. They prepared a cover story. On September 10th, 1931, 4 men in suits walked into Maranzano's 9th-floor office at 230 Park Avenue in Manhattan. They identified themselves as federal agents. They said they were there to inspect Maranzano's books. Maranzano told his bodyguards to wait outside. The bodyguards waited outside. Inside the office, the 4 men removed pistols and knives from their coats. They stabbed Maranzano 4 times. They shot him 4 times. He was dead before he hit the floor.
The four men walked out of the office. They walked past the bodyguards, who were still waiting in the hall. They walked down 9 flights of stairs. They walked out into Park Avenue. They disappeared. One of those 4 men is widely believed to have been B.O. Weinberg, working under Lansky's direction. The identities of the others have never been officially confirmed. What is confirmed is the date. September 10, 1931. 4 months and 26 days after Joe Masseria died at the lunch table in Coney Island. The 2 most powerful Italian-American gangsters in America had both been killed. The man who arranged both murders had not personally pulled a single trigger. He was 33 years old. He had been called lucky for less than 2 years. And he had just won. What Luciano did in the weeks that followed is what made him a historical figure, rather than just another gangster. He did not declare himself the new boss of all bosses. He did not take Maranzano's title. He did not even take Maranzano's office. He did the opposite. He told every boss in America that the title of Capo di tutti capi was abolished. There would be no more boss of all bosses. There would be no more single supreme leader. Instead, he proposed a council, a board of directors, a commission. What followed has been called by some historians the most important business meeting in American criminal history. In late 1931, Luciano convened the bosses of the 5 New York families he had just rearranged: Bonanno, Profaci, Mangano, Galliano, and the family Luciano now ran himself. He also invited the Chicago outfit. He invited the Buffalo organization. He brought together representatives from across the country. He proposed a structure. No single boss would rule. A commission of senior bosses would settle disputes, approve hits, divide territories, and prevent wars. No boss could be killed without the commission's approval. No territory could be invaded without the commission's approval. According to later accounts, drug trafficking was forbidden on the grounds that it brought too much federal attention. The rules of engagement that had killed men during the Castellammarese War were to be replaced by arbitration. The bosses agreed. They agreed because Luciano had just demonstrated in the most direct possible way what happened to bosses who didn't agree.
The commission was formed. 5 families in New York. A commission of senior bosses across the country. 5 families that still exist today.
Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese. The names changed over the decades as bosses died or went to prison. The structure did not. When you read about the Italian-American mob in 2026, you are reading about Lucky Luciano's organization chart from late 1931. He was 33 years old when he did it. He would die decades later in exile in Italy. He never lived to see what he had built grow into what it is now. But the system he set in motion in those 5 months, 5 families, 1 commission, 1 set of rules, is still the structure of the American Mafia today. He was a Sicilian immigrant who arrived in America with nothing. He left behind a structure that outlived him by more than 3 decades, and in many ways has not yet ended. If you want more true stories history left behind, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us, what did history leave out about Lucky Luciano? Or did the legend get him exactly right? We read every comment.